Hello, my name is Egon Chalakian. Every year, approximately 6 million children under the age of 15 die worldwide. That is more than 16,000 children every single day, or 11 children every minute. For a long time now, we comforted ourselves with the belief that we were doing everything possible and that this figure was steadily declining. Today, however, that illusion has collapsed. International assessment models provide an unequivocal outlook. 2025 will become the first year of the 21st century in which global mortality among children under the age of 5 will not decline, but instead will begin to rise. This is a statistical verdict that has already been delivered, even though official reports have not yet been published. We are standing on the threshold of a catastrophe. And what are we doing in response? We are drowning in discussions. The causes being debated are familiar and expected: economics, wars, inequality, and access to adequate health care. All of this does matter, yet within these discussions, one fundamental factor is systematically ignored, a factor without which it is impossible to comprehend the true scale of what is actually unfolding. It does not depend on exchange rates or political regimes, yet it has already penetrated the very foundation of life and is destroying it from within. I am not here to choose diplomatic phrasing. I am a scientist, and I see what others prefer not to see. I consider it imperative to speak about this factor openly, because our lives depend on it. I am speaking about micro and nanoplastics. Look at the map of child mortality. Filter out HIV, malaria, other similar diseases, and accidental causes. What remains? Hundreds of thousands of deaths for which pathologists can offer no clear explanation. Unexplained cardiac arrest, sudden organ failure. Why? Because the factor of micro and nanoplastics is still not being accounted for, despite the increasingly evident and diverse destructive trends associated with it. Despite advances in medical science, we are witnessing a rise in child mortality and in overall mortality as well. We see chronic diseases emerging earlier and progressing more aggressively across the entire globe. We are witnessing a decline in biodiversity and an intensification of climate anomalies. These are not isolated crises. They are links in a single chain, a plastic chain. And the fact that society continues to ignore this factor has already become lethal. Today, I want to discuss some new and uncomfortable facts about a very real scenario of a zombie apocalypse, and about the risk that today's children may become the last generation of humanity. To ensure clarity regarding what I will address next, I will briefly revisit the basic information on micro and nanoplastics. Many of you are aware that micro and nanoplastics are constantly penetrating every environment, including soil, water, air, and living organisms, and have already become part of the food chain. We continuously ingest nanoplastics through the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we consume. Many of you are also aware that micro and nanoplastics can penetrate all human organs, including the brain, heart, and circulatory system. What very few people understand, however, is that once inside, nanoplastics do not simply accumulate passively. They actively destroy our bodies. What then makes nanoplastics so dangerous? Of course, many of you have heard of bisphenols and phthalates. Treating diseases associated with the most toxic additives used in plastics cost humanity approximately $1.5 trillion every year. Yet the most dangerous aspect of nanoplastics is not even their chemical composition, but their unique physical properties. I am referring to the ability of nanoplastics to accumulate and retain an electrostatic charge on their surface. Through this charge, nanoplastics are capable of overcoming virtually any biological barrier and accumulating in living organisms, including humans. How does this occur? Charged plastic particles enter our bodies through water, food, or air, adhere to the walls of blood vessels, and attract proteins and blood cells. Simply put, the particles become coated with a distinctive biological shell, causing our body to no longer recognize the plastic as a foreign threat. In this way, plastic, like a Trojan horse, is able to penetrate complex biological barriers of our body, including the blood-brain barrier and the placental barrier, move even deeper and ultimately enter the cells themselves, destroying them. It is precisely this property that is examined as the key factor of nanoplastics' destructive influence in the documentary film Nanoplastics: Threat to Life, produced by the ALLATRA Global Research Center. Such an approach has scarcely been applied before. In this film, created with the participation of world-renowned scientists, the spectrum of threats associated with micro and nanoplastics is investigated and revealed for the very first time. The scale of the danger these particles pose to current and future generations is thoroughly analyzed. Undoubtedly, this is a unique and foundational work, and it should be viewed by everyone who seeks to understand the significance of the threat that micro and nanoplastics pose to life. I will tell you straight, the film is absolutely truthful, yet it is rather restrained, and the facts are presented carefully and far too diplomatically so as not to frighten the viewer. Yes, it lifts the veil on what is happening, but in reality, the situation is far worse. I will put it this way. Nanoplastics affect the human body in much the same way as radiation. Once inside, they simply destroy cells. The only difference is that radiation acts rapidly, while nanoplastics act slowly. Owing to their minute size and electrostatic charge, they penetrate the body and begin destroying it from within, often imperceptibly and without immediate symptoms. They do not cause an instant collapse. Instead, they disrupt cellular processes, damage mitochondria, the energy stations of our cells, impair DNA and immune regulation, and gradually erode health until the body begins to fail across multiple systems simultaneously. Today, micro and nanoplastic particles have been detected in virtually all organs of the human body. In each of them, in every single cell, these charged particles initiate the same cascade of internal destruction. They break down intercellular connections, trigger programmed cell death, and deprive cells of the ability to produce the energy essential for life. These processes affect brain cells, heart cells, lung tissue, and bone tissue with equal severity. Nanoplastics accelerate aging and act as a trigger for the development of chronic diseases. All of this can hasten the onset of cancer, cardiovascular and autoimmune disorders, infertility, and neurodegenerative diseases. Now, let us return to our children. In their cells, nanoplastics do exactly the same thing. However, their effect on children is far more severe. Exposure to nanoplastics begins even before birth. They are detected in the placenta, in the umbilical cord blood, and in the amniotic fluid. This means that a child encounters nanoplastics even before taking the first breath. After birth, exposure to nanoplastics only intensifies. Air, water, food, children's products, toys, textiles, household dust. Per kilogram of body weight, a child receives significantly more micro and nanoplastics than an adult. A child breathes more frequently and therefore inhales more particles. A child consumes 2 to 3 times more water and food per kilogram of body weight. At the same time, the total number of cells in a child's body is proportionally much lower than in an adult relative to body mass. Consequently, nanoplastics are capable of accumulating in a much larger relative volume. This is especially concerning when we recall that parents do everything possible to ensure their child eat properly and consume plenty of fruits and vegetables, in which scientists incidentally are finding enormous concentrations of plastic particles, particularly in carrots and apples. But the most important point is something else. A child's body is still forming, and its protective barriers are only beginning to mature. During the first 1,000 days of a child's life, the foundations of the nervous, immune, endocrine, cardiovascular, and respiratory systems are established. Any toxic interference during this period can determine a person's health for a lifetime. The blood-brain barrier, the intestines, the lungs, the skin, the liver, all of these systems in a child are in a stage of development. When nanoplastics enter the body at this moment, they interact not with the stable systems of an adult, but with systems that are only learning how to function. They are more permeable, less mature, and far less capable of protecting the child. The child's brain is particularly vulnerable. In early childhood, neural connections are actively forming, and cognitive and emotional centers are being calibrated. At the same time, the brain's protective barrier has not yet fully developed, which can facilitate the direct penetration of nanoparticles into the child's brain. The child's immune system is also in a stage of development. It is not a reduced version of an adult immune system. It is a system that is still learning how to distinguish threats. Under toxic load, it is easily disrupted. Studies have revealed an alarming fact. Micro and nanoplastics are capable of penetrating even the thymus, the organ that trains the immune system. Moreover, the smaller the particles, the more destructive they are to the thymus. The thymus is especially critical in early childhood. It forms T cells, the foundation of immune defense and immune tolerance. Disruption of thymic function in childhood means an elevated risk of disease for an entire lifetime. Due to the electrostatic charge of micro and nanoplastics, as well as bisphenols and phthalates, the endocrine and reproductive systems of children are under threat. These substances disrupt the formation and development of children's reproductive organs, which can lead to infertility in adulthood. Thus, charged nanoplastics can penetrate children's bodies far more easily, influence the still developing protective systems of the child's organism, and therefore more readily destroy the child's body from within, ultimately leading to death. The more nanoplastics accumulate, the faster a child's body deteriorates. It is profoundly disturbing when we are unable to protect our own offspring. Here we arrive at another topic that is rarely discussed. Sudden infant death syndrome remains one of the leading causes of infant mortality, and its incidence is increasing. In the United States alone, between 2020 and 2022, the number of such deaths rose by 12%, which may be associated with increasing levels of nanoplastics in the atmosphere. As I have already mentioned, nanoplastics directly impact mitochondria, the energy centers of our cells. As a result, significantly less energy is produced, and cells begin to experience chronic energy deficiency. In order to survive, the cell activates a compensatory mechanism. It increases the number of mitochondria and critically the number of copies of mitochondria DNA. This is the cell's response to damage. Recent studies have shown that in children who died from sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, the cerebral cortex contained a higher number of mitochondrial DNA copies compared to the control group. This fact is of fundamental importance. It indicates that changes in the number of mitochondrial DNA copies should be regarded as a biological marker of the pathological process underlying sudden infant death syndrome. A logical conclusion follows from this. Exposure to micro and nanoplastics as a factor that induces mitochondrial dysfunction may play a key role in the development of sudden infant death syndrome and other pathologies that lead to the deaths of children. Today, an increasing number of independent scientists are saying that we have reached a threshold beyond which the very quality of human generation begins to change. Within the scientific community, expressions that were once unthinkable are now being heard more frequently. Cyborg infants and plastic children. This is not a metaphor, it is an attempt to describe a terrifying reality. Children are already being born with biological burden associated with the presence of micro and nanoplastics in the body. Moreover, these so-called plastic children have smaller body sizes and less developed brains compared to typical children. This means only one thing. Health problems are no longer the exception. They are becoming the default settings of the human organism. For the first time in history, we are facing a situation in which a factor created by ourselves is being embedded into the biology of the next generation even before it comes into the world. Consider the current state of human reproductive health. Contemporary research increasingly indicates that mitochondrial dysfunction may be one of the root causes of infertility in both men and women. Mitochondrial dysfunction affects not only the ability to conceive, but also the course of pregnancy and the development of embryo at the very earliest stages. Here, a direct connection emerges. As you already know, it is precisely mitochondria that electrostatically charged nanoplastics strike with some of their most destructive effects. The accumulation of micro and nanoplastics in reproductive organs means persistent cellular energy depletion, DNA damage, and disruption of the mechanisms of which the transmission of life to future children depends. In 2025, a study was published revealing the presence of microplastic particles in the follicular fluid of the ovaries in 14 out of 18 women examined. The average concentration exceeded 2,000 particles per millimeter. Can you grasp what that amount actually represents and how enormous it is? This is a fundamentally important finding. Follicular fluid is the very environment in which the egg cell forms and matures. The presence of micro and nanoplastics there constitutes direct interference in the processes that determine the health of the female reproductive system, the quality of the egg, and the viability of the future embryo. The situation for men is no better. In studies conducted by Chinese scientists, microplastics were detected in every single semen sample without exception. Experiments have shown that within the first 30 minutes of exposure, mitochondrial function in sperm cells is disrupted and DNA damage begins. The outcome is predictable. Sperm motility decreases, viability declines, and fertilization capacity deteriorates sharply. Testosterone synthesis is an extremely energy-intensive process that requires enormous resources in the form of ATP. Yet even minimal amounts of electrostatically charged nanoplastics that penetrate mitochondria are sufficient to disrupt their function. This leads to a critical drop in ATP production, which inevitably results in a 60 to 70% reduction in testosterone levels. Such a hormonal collapse directly affects the condition of the blood vessels in the pinna corpora cavernosa, which are responsible for the mechanism of erection. As a result, this initially provokes erectile dysfunction and subsequently leads to complete impotence. Moreover, the problem is compounded by the fact that the electrostatically charged nanoplastics block the transmission of nerve impulses. The consequence is a situation in which, even in the presence of sexual arousal, the body's physical response does not occur, and erection simply does not develop. These conclusions are supported by robust experimental data. In particular, a study conducted by a Chinese university demonstrated that in animals with chronic microplastic intoxication, erectile function was impaired after just 1 month of exposure. At the same time, another alarming fact is being documented. The prevalence of symptoms of erectile dysfunction among men worldwide has reached up to 75%. 75%. Reflect on that number. This is not an outlook. This is what is already happening. We are not dealing with temporary malfunctions, but with persistent disorders that continue to progress. And even those who still retain functionality today are constantly ingesting nanoplastics because the concentration of micro and nanoplastics in the environment, and therefore within us, is not decreasing. It is increasing. Medicine is attempting to compensate for the consequences. Increasingly aggressive drugs are being introduced. The number of surgical interventions is rising, including penile prosthesis implantation, procedures that until recently were considered a last resort. Today, such operations are becoming almost routine for young men. Just take a moment to reflect on that. And what comes next? Will parents start saving for their children not for college, but for penile prosthesis? Or will they give certificates for such surgery as a wedding gift? In truth, there will soon be little sense in this at all, because what exactly are we trying to compensate for in this way? If sperm cells are being massively damaged by nanoplastics at the level of mitochondria and DNA, if egg cells are forming in an environment saturated with microplastics, then such technical solutions do not eliminate the cause. They merely mask the consequences. As a result, we arrive at a situation in which damaged sperm cells meet damaged egg cells, and the degradation of reproductive potential becomes the norm rather than the exception. Since egg cells and sperm cells are already contaminated with nanoplastics, this means that even the very first cell divisions at conception occur with distortions. Do you hear this? They will not occur someday in the future. They are already occurring. That is precisely why year after year, the number of abnormalities will increase, and this process will unfold at a frightening pace. This is no longer a matter of individual health. It is a matter of humanity's biological future. The accumulation of nanoplastics in reproductive organs is already leading to mass infertility. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 6 people worldwide is already affected by infertility. According to some scientists' outlooks, by 2045, the planet's population may become completely infertile. At present, we are observing 2 processes simultaneously. On the one hand, the loss of the ability to reproduce fully. On the other hand, the birth of a generation of children who carry micro and nanoplastics within them from the very beginning. The very children who are increasingly being referred to in the scientific community as cyborg children. Combine these two facts to understand what future awaits us. If anyone has not yet grasped it, I will state it plainly. Humanity is already standing on the brink of extinction. The children who have been born now, those referred to as plastic children, will either be incapable of conception, or even if a miracle occurs, and in some of them do reproduce, the health of their offspring will be effectively non-existent. This means that the last generation of humanity has already been born. Everything you have just heard is not science fiction. These are real biological mechanisms triggered by this electrostatically charged nano killer. And I assume a question naturally arises. What can actually be done about this? I will begin with a fundamental admission. The global scientific community is only now beginning to grasp the full magnitude of the threat posed by micro and nanoplastics. Even what is already known today causes the gravest concern among specialists. The situation is further compounded by the fact that at present there is no single test or procedure capable of accurately determining the total amount of nanoplastics in a living human being. Yes, it is possible to analyze blood or semen and detect microplastic particles there, but that is merely the tip of the iceberg. The most dangerous threat comes not from microplastics, but from nanoplastics, the smallest particles capable of freely crossing the blood-brain barrier, penetrating the brain and entering cells, destroying them from within. And most importantly, it is impossible to remove nanoplastics from our cells, just as it is impossible to reliably determine their true quantity in the living person. That said, I can tell you about one method of assessment, although it can reveal only one thing, the scale of the catastrophe. If, for example, nanoplastic particles are detected in capillary blood drawn from a finger, this is an enormous warning sign. It means that the capillaries are already affected, and therefore the damage is systemic, involving all organs and systems. Understand this correctly. The detection of nanoplastics in capillary blood does not indicate localized contamination, but rather that they are circulating throughout the entire body, reflecting a high degree of bioavailability and total organism involvement. If nanoplastics are found even in the capillaries, just imagine what their actual quantity must be in larger vessels and tissues. But let us return to the actual quantity of nanoplastics in our bodies. Take the brain alone. Neither MRI or CT, the most advanced imaging methods available to us today, can reveal them. The paradox is that approximate figures for the contamination of human tissues are obtained exclusively through pathological examination, that is, after death. It was precisely through autopsies that we learned a shocking truth. The brain of every one of us already contains a vast and destructive amount of nanoplastics. In those rare cases where in-depth studies are conducted, frighteningly high concentrations of plastic particles are found, precisely in the affected tissues, including the brain, atherosclerotic plaques, and tumors. Anyone who doubts this is welcome to visit a morgue and then proceed to a Raman microscope. Go and see for yourselves. Wherever the appropriate equipment is available, nanoplastics are found. It is impossible to find a person who died from any cause, even from trauma, whose brain did not contain plastic particles, and in enormous quantities. This is not a theory. It is today's reality. If you are in doubt, verify it yourselves. Yet even these post-mortem data represent only a drop in the ocean. The problem is that detecting nanoplastics requires expensive equipment and cutting-edge methods that are simply unavailable to most physicians and scientists. For example, a combined method of pyrolytic gas chromatography with mass spectrometry coupled with vibrational spectroscopy and confocal Raman microscopy, this method makes it possible to identify the presence of nanoplastics, but it is extremely labor-intensive, difficult to access, and most importantly, it can be applied only to individual samples, specific tissue fragments, or blood specimens. It does not provide a direct, comprehensive picture of the entire organism. The outcome is fatal. Millions of people are dying, while medical conclusions continue to list familiar diagnoses, with physicians unaware of the true cause. Behind these diagnoses, more and more often lies the factor we have refused to see for far too long: the external influence of electrostatically charged nanoplastics on the human body. This creates a closed loop. We can only roughly estimate the level of contamination within us and then multiply those figures many times over. After all, the intake of microplastics and especially nanoplastics into our bodies occurs continuously, without pauses or interruptions. And as we have already established, it is impossible to extract them. We can perform plasmapheresis and even filter some amount of microplastics from the blood, but there is no way to remove nanoplastics from the brain or from our cells. They will continue to destroy them one by one. So, returning to this one question, what can we do? How can you specifically protect yourself from nanoplastics? I will take responsibility for saying this to you directly. You can do absolutely nothing. You are free people, and you have the right to do whatever you choose with your lives. But I would strongly advise against listening to those who claim that you can somehow isolate yourself from the intake of nanoplastics into your body. We cannot protect ourselves from it because virtually all the plastic humanity has ever created still exists within our biosphere. It is constantly breaking down into micro and nanoplastics, which means it will enter our bodies continuously through air, water, and food. This issue is not hiding, but minimizing time spent in zones of lethal concentration. I have said this before, and I will repeat it. Forests, coastlines, and open bodies of water are massive reservoirs and sources of nanoplastics. And here I must issue a direct warning to residents of our continent. Do not take your children to European resorts, to the Mediterranean Sea, and here is why. The concentration of microplastics in this region is approximately 4 times higher than in the northern Pacific Ocean, where incidentally, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is located. Not long ago, scientists identified a 6th garbage patch hidden in the Mediterranean Sea. It is referred to as invisible because it consists of extremely fine microplastics. I can state that this is the most dangerous garbage patch on the planet because the plastic there has already degraded to particle sizes that are lethal to our internal organs and cells. People travel there to relax, believing they are improving their health, when in reality they are bringing their families into the epicenter of contamination. That is why I say protect your children. Their bodies are smaller, and the impact of nanoplastics on them is far more severe. The period immediately after swimming is particularly dangerous. If you leave the water and lie in the sun while still wet, transdermal penetration of nanoplastics occurs. This, among other factors, explains the rise in skin cancer cases. Everyone who breathes the air near the Mediterranean inhales extreme doses of nanoplastics. This is an area that, at very least, should have been designated an exclusion zone 5 years ago, and realistically 10 years ago. It is a zone where no one except specialists should be present, due to its extreme danger. I will say this plainly, it is even worse than Chernobyl. Imagine a territory that emits contamination indefinitely, as if after a reactor explosion. In addition to the danger that nanoplastics in the Mediterranean pose to the population of the entire region, approximately 500 million people, such extreme concentrations of charged plastic particles also contribute to abnormal warming of the Mediterranean Sea. This plastic-driven heating of the sea further warms Europe, intensifying climate anomalies, extreme weather events, and natural disasters across the region. If people fully understood the danger, they would have moved away long ago. But frankly, on a global scale, this would change very little. There is far more plastic in the world's oceans. They are its largest reservoir, and this plastic is also continuously fragmenting into micro and nanoparticles, which constantly enter the atmosphere and are transported over the vast distances. As a result of ongoing increase in electrostatically charged plastic particles across all planetary systems, excess electrical potential is accumulating. This disrupts Earth's energy balance. We are already observing the consequences worldwide. Each year is warmer than the last. Ocean warming is accelerating. Atmospheric anomalies are increasing. The frequency and intensity of cataclysms continue to rise. This is where the circle closes. The warmer the ocean becomes, the faster it acidifies. The faster it acidifies, the more rapid plastic degrades. The more nanoplastics there are, the greater the energy imbalance. All of these processes reinforce one another. For this reason, the problem cannot be concealed for long. For now, it is primarily discussed by scientists, but it will soon become impossible for the broader public to ignore. And the issue is not even when everyone starts talking about it. What matters is something else. Plastic is already present in every one of us, and this nano killer is destroying us all from within. The same nano killer exists in enormous quantities in the atmosphere and in the air we breathe. It is an invisible aerosol that penetrates the lungs and the bloodstream. That is why it is better to avoid places and conditions with high concentrations of plastic particles. Humidity is your enemy. The highest concentrations are observed in damp weather. Whenever and wherever possible, avoid going outside in fog and rain. Raindrops carry colossal quantities of these assassins. Keep windows closed when it is damp outside or when it is raining. However, even if you believe that dry environments are safe, this is an illusion. For example, deserts also contain large quantities of nanoplastics, which are carried there by winds. However, humid zones and bodies of water are the epicenters of contamination. It is time we acknowledge a simple truth. The more plastic enters your body, the shorter your lifespan is. This is a direct linear correlation. Yes, this topic has not yet become mainstream, but believe me, it is a matter of near future. The growth of chronic diseases and deaths will not decrease. In the coming years, all of this will rise catastrophically and will become humanity's #1 problem. We already see this in the state of human health. This is not merely a headache or low mood. It is the result of the destructive action of nanoplastics, ranging from rheumatic conditions and osteoarthritis to cognitive impairment and memory problems, to hormonal disruptions and impotence, and most frighteningly of all, premature death. Currently, this process is accelerating at an unprecedented pace. An especially catastrophic surge has occurred over the past 5 years. What we are witnessing now is no longer a warning. It is the consequence of nanoplastic exposure. Even if at the moment nothing hurts. Mood swings, unexplained headaches, apathy, moments when you enter a room and cannot remember why, absent mindfulness, forgetfulness, and difficulty concentrating may all indicate that your cognitive functions are already being affected. If attention declines, if memory worsens, if it becomes harder to sustain a thought, this may mean that the process of neuronal connection degradation has already begun. These are precisely the processes triggered by electrostatically charged nanoplastics in the brain. And I am not exaggerating. Electrostatic nanoplastics, once inside the brain, interact with neuronal membranes and activate microglia, initiating a continuous cycle of oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. The brain is a biological computer, and like any system, it strives to conserve energy. When the level of stress and inflammation reaches a critical threshold, the brain makes a fatal decision. In order to survive, it shuts down the most energy-intensive modules. The first to be affected is the prefrontal cortex, our control center. This is the youngest and most complex part of the brain, responsible for intellect, logic, planning, and behavioral control. This shutdown occurs imperceptibly. That is precisely why there are so many disturbed individuals today. Look around. It feels as though psychiatric hospitals were closed and all patients released onto the streets. And this is not an exaggeration. You can already see it for yourselves. Before the final shutdown of the prefrontal cortex, we will not feel pain or sudden blow. At a certain point, complex thought processes will simply become impossible. The brain will switch to emergency power, activating the ancient limbic system. The amygdala and hypothalamus will take control, triggering primitive reactions, fight, flight, or freeze. We will lose the ability to learn and to remember. Anxiety and aggression will become chronic, while neural networks responsible for analysis and control will atrophy. The result of this process is total degradation. The human neocortex will shut down abruptly, and we will lose the ability to recognize real danger and respond to it adequately. Just imagine a world in which those who have retained the remnants of intellect look on in horror, and their loved ones who have turned into biorobots, driven solely by instincts and primitive reflexes. We will forget how to use tools. We will forget how to obtain food except by taking it by force. We will lose the skills of construction, medicine, and science. Everything that humanity has accumulated over thousands of years will vanish. In the wild, we have always prevailed due to our intelligence. But once intelligence is shut down, our competition with animals becomes a losing one. We will not be able to build traps. We will not be able to use weapons. And we will not be able to outrun predators that are faster than we are. We will become worse than monkeys. And then the law of the jungle will take effect in its most brutal form. I am sure you have watched films about a zombie apocalypse, so you can imagine what may await us. Incidentally, have you noticed that Hollywood produces all sorts of absurd stories, and then they begin to materialize? I have lived long enough to see that, unfortunately, they sometimes portray things that we later have to confront in reality. I assume a question has now arisen for you. Does this mean that we are all doomed? No. If we cannot remove the enemy from the battlefield, we must neutralize its weapon. And the weapon of nanoplastics, as you already know, is the electrostatic charge. Here, credit must be given to those who are already trying to change the course of events. In this regard, Alatra scientists have undertaken truly monumental work. What we have done in the Alatra movement by establishing the true cause of the catastrophe is not merely a scientific breakthrough. It is an invaluable gift to humanity. We have identified a realistically viable way out to deprive nanoplastic particles of their ability to accumulate and retain an electrostatic charge. By doing so, we have saved global science enormous resources, but most importantly, time. Decades of futile searching. However, knowing the cause does not mean automatic rescue. We have hit a wall that we cannot break through alone. We no longer have our own laboratories. The situation is further complicated by the fact that Alatra participants are subjected to persecution and unjust criminal prosecution, both in Russia and in Ukraine. As a result, we have lost equipment, infrastructure, and the capacity to conduct full-scale experiments. We are doing everything within our power, but we have come to the understanding that solving a problem of this magnitude requires the intellect of the entire global scientific community. And now I would like to offer a subtle hint for bright people. To grasp the depth and complexity of the task of neutralizing the charge of nanoplastics, I will provide just one example. For this, we must descend into the engine room of life, the place where biology meets quantum physics. By disrupting the function of DNA and proteins, nanoplastics are, in fact, interfering not merely with chemical processes, but with the very bioelectricity upon which every one of our cells depends. Our DNA is a chiral molecule, a spiral twisted strictly in one direction. And this form exists not for aesthetic reasons. It turns DNA into a unique quantum filter of electricity. Yes, you heard that correctly. DNA does not simply conduct electric current. It filters it, or more precisely, it sorts electrons by their spin, a quantum state allowing electrons with one spin orientation to pass through while scattering those with the opposite spin. In physics, this process is known as the cis effect, chiral-induced spin selectivity. Owing to this unique effect, electrons within DNA line up in an orderly fashion, forming an intelligent spin-polarized current, whereas the current flowing through the wires that power your light bulb has no such property. There, charge flows chaotically, with electron spins distributed roughly 50-50. Incidentally, does this not suggest to you that electricity is a living system, and electricity in a wire may behave in fundamentally different ways? In nature, the cis effect, which occurs at room temperature in a soft environment without the involvement of external magnets, is found only in biological electricity, specifically in chiral molecules such as DNA, proteins, and others. This effect allows the cell to carry out extraordinarily complex reactions with surgical precision, avoiding errors and parasitic processes. The uniqueness of this phenomenon lies in the fact that, in laboratory conditions, controlling electron spin requires powerful magnets and extremely low temperatures. In our bodies, however, this mechanism has been operating stably for billions of years in the noisy, warm environment of living cells. And yet it is precisely this most delicate tuning that electrostatically charged nanoplastics strike. Nanoplastics are achiral and electrostatically aggressive. When they absorb onto DNA, they disrupt its chirality and the quantum filter is effectively switched off. Instead of a coherent signal, the cell receives a chaotic electrical noise. This means that the cell loses its chemical acuity. The precision of respiration, photosynthesis, and signal transmission declines. Nanoplastics do not merely break a component, they damage the very quantum blueprint of life. And it is precisely here that the answer to the question of why neutralizing nanoplastics is so complex lies. This is a challenge that requires the unification of quantum physicists and biologists, because we must protect the very electrodynamics of life itself. We are dealing with a quantum nanokiller that disrupts the most subtle aspects of electrodynamics in living matter. That is why I want to emphasize that the search for a solution demands an immediate and profound immersion into the field of quantum interactions between nanoplastics and electron charges and spins. And now, please listen carefully to what I'm about to say, because I'm speaking as a scientist who weighs every word. This solution cannot be local. What works in a test tube is utterly useless in the real world. We need a solution for the entire biosphere at once. It must function simultaneously in your brain, in your alveoli of your lungs, in the cells of the heart, and in the depths of the ocean. I state this with full responsibility. There is no chemical solution to this problem, and there cannot be one. Any chemical substance capable of penetrating a cell and neutralizing the charge of plastic would inevitably kill the cell itself. This is a dead end. We would be killing the patient while attempting to cure the disease. The only path forward is grounded in physics. We have worked through numerous theoretical models. We know that certain physical methods could, in principle, work. But here lies the greatest danger. Crude intervention could damage or even destroy Earth's magnetic field. And the magnetic field is the foundation of life on this planet. Our shield against space. We have no right to replace one catastrophe with another. Solving this problem requires an exquisitely delicate compromise, a physical influence that can remove the charge from nanoplastics while leaving the planet's magnetic shield intact. This is a task of extraordinary complexity, requiring the synthesis of knowledge and joint effort of specialists in biophysics, nanotechnology, molecular toxicology, and material science. Addressing the plastic crisis requires global cooperation and a collective effort to protect both ourselves and our planet. Who will ultimately find the solution? We do not know. Perhaps it will be a team of scientists, or perhaps the insight will come to you while you are simply sitting on your couch, exhausted after a long day. Insight does not choose titles or credentials. Humanity is facing a challenge unlike anything it has in the past. However, if a problem exists, then a solution also exists. The only question is whether we will find it before the point of no return is crossed. We have opened the door, but entering it and defusing the time bomb is something we must do together. We have identified the root cause of the process. Nanoplastics must be deprived of their electrostatic charge. Once this happens, they will instantly become inert, figuratively speaking, turning into ordinary dust and ceasing to pose a lethal threat to human health and to the planet's ecosystems. The consequences of this step would be global. Natural self-restoration mechanisms of the environment would immediately be set in motion. Heat exchange in the atmosphere and the ocean would begin to recover. Excess heat from the Earth's interior would once again be able to dissipate freely into space. The ocean and the atmosphere would start returning to a state of equilibrium. And then perhaps, and I do emphasize perhaps, the Siberian magma plume will not be activated. However, for this to be achieved, in addition to neutralizing nanoplastics, one more critical condition must be met. The experimental equipment, which had functioned precisely in the area of the Siberian magma plume for 10 years and had proven its effectiveness, must be restored to operation. There is a chance, but it requires immediate action. Now I am addressing you and your common sense. Those in whom it still remains. Unfortunately, many are no longer capable of grasping the scale of the threat. Some have been broken by totalitarian regimes. Others have been conditioned by the system to stop thinking, shifting responsibility onto governments, doctors, or anyone at all. And some, most frightening of all, due to already accumulated pathologies in the body caused by the same nanoplastics, are no longer capable of critical thought. The mind is clouded. The will is paralyzed. That is why we are standing on the edge of an abyss. And yet, we continue to make plans decades and even centuries ahead. I am addressing everyone, especially parents with children. We think about a future home for our children and grandchildren. We plan the construction of new cities, technological breakthroughs, and the extension of life beyond species limits, the colonization of Mars, and the exploration of space. But the future we so strive for and so deeply desire is rapidly turning into an illusion, at exactly the same speed with which nanoplastic particles penetrate our brains and our cells. For the future not to become an illusion, your involvement is necessary. Understand a simple truth. Political decisions are made only when there is public demand. In the film, Nanoplastics, Threat to Life, the respected scientist, Mr. Ganatra, expressed the idea that it does not matter how many more scientific papers researchers write. If society does not recognize this problem, all scientific efforts will be meaningless. I fully agree with my colleague. Recall what happens during a pandemic when society demands solutions. Funding for scientists and specialists appears instantly. So know this. Right now, we are facing the worst pandemic humanity has ever encountered. Scientists worldwide working on micro and nanoplastics issues require funding and opportunities for interdisciplinary collaboration. They need equipment and the ability to work together. Only under these conditions is it possible to find a solution. One outstanding contemporary scientist once said, "People of science possess intellect, data, and heart, but they do not always have a voice." That is why resonance is needed now. Loud, overwhelming resonance that those who make decisions will not be able to ignore. What can you personally do? Study the problem. Do not remain indifferent. This concerns you directly if you are still capable of critically assessing reality. We need the help of every citizen so that we are heard. But above all, we need the will to live. Why should we kill one another in wars and conflicts when we are all being killed by a single common invisible enemy? An enemy with a 100% fatal outcome. And it is not killing us metaphorically. It is killing us in reality. Right now, every one of us who is alive today. And I want you to grasp this. Until you do, if you are still capable of doing so, you will remain inactive, just like those who are no longer able to comprehend it. If we do not find a solution, I state this with responsibility. No one who has already been born will live to reach my age. The future of humanity now hangs on a thin plastic thread. Do you know which words are the most painful for me to utter? The words, too late. Unfortunately, I have already said them twice in my earlier addresses, speaking about humanity's missed opportunities. The first time when I spoke about AGW, and the second when I spoke about the degassing of the Siberian plume. But in the case of nanoplastics, I fear I may not even have the chance to say them, because when it becomes too late in the case of nanoplastics, there will most likely be no one left to say it to, and no one left to hear it. We are balancing on the very edge of this abyss right now. Every day of silence and inaction brings us closer to a line beyond which there will be no solutions, no laboratories, and no prayers. There will be only science and disintegration. I want to hope for something else. I want to believe that for every person listening to me now, their own life, as well as the lives of their own children and loved ones, has value. I believe that we, as humanity, are capable of choosing life, because life is worth fighting for.